The bag hit the bedroom floor before Yolanda Kamara could make it to the doorway. She'd heard him pulling it from the closet shelf. The large one, the one they used for real trips, not weekend drives up to Kingston. And she'd made herself get up from the couch, despite the fact that her joints felt like someone had packed them with gravel overnight. 6 months pregnant, in the middle of a lupus flare that her rheumatologist had been managing carefully for 3 weeks. And she had gotten herself upright and walked down the hall because she had a feeling, and she needed to be wrong about it. She wasn't wrong. Stuart. His name came out quieter than she intended. What are you doing? Stuart Whitfield didn't look up from the drawer he was emptying. He was methodical about it, which was somehow worse than if he'd been angry. Socks in a bundle, the good watch, the charger he always hogged. I think you know, he said. I don't. Tell me. He finally turned, and Yolanda looked at the face of the man she'd been with for 6 years, married to 3. And she watched him look at her stomach, the unmistakable curve of her, 6 months along, their daughter in there, and she watched something in his expression go flat and final. I can't do this anymore, Stuart said. The appointments, the medications, the restrictions. I feel like I've been living inside a medical file for 2 years, Yolanda. And now there's going to be a baby on top of all of it. On top of it. She repeated the phrase slowly. You mean our daughter? I mean everything. He zipped the bag. You made choices I didn't sign up for, pursuing this pregnancy knowing how risky it was. That was your call, and I supported it as long as I could. But I can't keep doing this. Can't. She pressed one hand against the wall to steady herself, or won't. He didn't answer. He picked up the bag. Stuart, her voice cracked on the one syllable just the once. She's going to be here in 3 months. I know, he said. I know exactly how much time is left, and I've thought about this for longer than you'd think. Then think again, right now, please. He walked past her to the front door. You were always stronger than me, Stuart said, not looking back. You'll figure it out, you always do. He closed the door behind him without slamming it, which was perhaps the cruelest thing of all. A slammed door meant emotion. This was just a decision, clean and already made, and she was simply the last one to know about it. Yolanda stood in the hallway of their Ottawa townhouse for a very long time. Then she went back to the couch, because her body required it, and she sat with both hands resting on her stomach, and she breathed until her chest stopped feeling like it had a fist inside it. It's okay, she said to her daughter. It's going to be okay. She didn't know yet if it was true, but she said it like it was. 3 days later, she found out that Stuart had gone to Kara Marsh. Kira was a financial analyst at his firm, someone Yolanda had met at 2 work parties, someone who had always been warm in that careful way that only made sense later. A mutual friend told her with obvious reluctance, eyes sliding away. Yolanda thanked them and got off the phone and sat in her car in the driveway, and allowed herself exactly 15 minutes to fall apart. Then she called her Aunt Beverly in Hamilton. Come, Aunt Beverly said before Yolanda had finished explaining. Just come, I'll have the room ready. She packed what she needed. She left Stuart's side of the closet untouched, because she couldn't deal with it then, and because she thought there was something important about not touching it. Like a record of what he'd chosen to leave behind. The drive from Ottawa to Hamilton was 3 hours. She stopped once at a Tim Hortons outside Kingston, not because she was hungry, but because she'd started crying somewhere near Gananoque, and needed a few minutes in a parking lot to collect herself before getting back on the highway. She moved into Aunt Beverly's spare room on the 2nd floor. The room had a quilt on the bed, and a window that looked out over the neighbor's maple tree. It was small and warm and smelled faintly of cedar, and Yolanda lay in it that first night and thought about how she had arrived at 32 years old, 6 months pregnant in the middle of a health crisis, sleeping in a room that wasn't hers. She thought about her daughter. She thought about what kind of life she intended to build for her. Then she stopped thinking and went to sleep. She found work she could do from home, contract transcription of medical records, careful and tedious, paid by the document. She took it seriously. She tracked every dollar. Aunt Beverly refused to accept rent, so Yolanda cooked instead. Caribbean dishes, Beverly's favorites, filling the kitchen with the smell of thyme and Scotch bonnets, and something resembling normalcy. The flare settled. Her new rheumatologist in Hamilton was good and the routine helped. She slept on a schedule. She ate carefully. She walked when she was able, short distances at first, then longer ones through the neighborhood as February turned to March and the snow began going gray at the edges. She was at a no-frills checkout line in the middle of March, counting out the items in her basket the way she'd learned to count everything now. When she came up 6.47 cents short, a jar of applesauce she'd planned for the baby once she arrived. She started to put it back. Here, said the woman in line behind her, already reaching forward with a 5 and a toonie. Please. Yolanda looked at her, an older woman, mid-60s, warm eyes, a reusable bag printed with a library logo. I can't. You can, the woman said simply. We all need a hand sometimes, let me. Yolanda took the money. She thanked her. She walked out with the applesauce and sat in her car and cried for the second time since leaving Ottawa. Though this time, she couldn't have explained exactly why. She went home, she put away the groceries. She fed Aunt Beverly's cat. And then, she sat at the kitchen table with a notebook she'd bought months ago and never opened, and she wrote the first sentence of a story she'd been carrying around in her head since before she could name it. It was about a girl who lived in a house where no one noticed she'd been keeping the whole place standing. Yolanda had been a children's librarian before her illness had required her to cut back her hours. She knew what children's stories needed: a clear beating heart, a character worth following, and a truth worth having. She wasn't precious about it. She wrote the way she used to read during story time. Directly, without performing, trusting the words to do what they were supposed to do. Her daughter Celina arrived on a Tuesday in late April, 3 weeks early, loudly, and with absolutely no interest in waiting. Yolanda was in the hospital for 4 days. Aunt Beverly slept in the chair beside her bed for 2 of them. Coming home with Celina was both the most terrifying and the most clarifying thing Yolanda had ever done. She had never felt more exhausted. She had never been more certain of anything in her life. She went back to the notebook when Celina slept. The story grew into a second, then a third. A series. A girl named Adisa who discovered, chapter by chapter, that all the things other people had called burdens were the places her strength had been building quietly. It wasn't a perfect metaphor, nothing was, but it was honest. And honest was the thing Yolanda had decided she was going to be from here forward. She submitted the first manuscript to 6 publishers in September. She received 5 rejections. The 6th was Harbour House Publishing out of Vancouver. A junior editor named Priya emailed asking if she'd be open to a call. They offered her a deal for the first 3 books in the series the following February. It was not a large deal, it was exactly enough to matter. Yolanda signed the papers at the kitchen table, with Celina in a bouncy chair beside her, and Aunt Beverly standing in the doorway because she'd refused to sit down until the pen was on the paper. The books came out over the next 18 months. The first one, Adisa Keeps the Light On, went onto the Globe and Mail's children's bestseller list in its 3rd week. The second held the top spot for 11 weeks. By the time the 3rd arrived, Harbour House was fielding calls Yolanda had not anticipated. A licensing deal, an animated series inquiry from CBC, a paperback edition sold into 7 countries. And then on an ordinary Wednesday in November, Yolanda Kamara was sitting across from a host on a CBC morning program, Celina at daycare, her publicist just off to the left of the camera frame, and she was talking about what it meant to write a character who understood that being underestimated was not the same as being worth less. The host asked about her life. Yolanda answered carefully, because she had become careful about what she put into the world. Not evasive, but considered. I was in a very difficult place when I started writing, she said. And writing gave me somewhere to put the things I couldn't say out loud yet. The segment ran for 12 minutes. It aired at 8:40 in the morning. By that afternoon, Harbour House's inbox had over 3,000 messages. Stuart Whitfield was having breakfast in Kara's Berry condo when the segment played. They were not watching it intentionally. It was just on. The television left running in the background the way televisions always were, and he registered the name before he registered the face. Yolanda Kamara. He heard it the way you hear something familiar in a noisy room. Then he looked at the screen. She looked nothing like the woman who had stood in the hallway of their Ottawa townhouse asking him to turn around. She looked, he would think later, like herself, except the exhausted, managed, carefully contained version he'd known had been replaced by something quieter and more settled. Steadier. Like something that had been under pressure long enough to become a different material entirely. The interviewer held up the book. Stuart could read the title from across the room. Adisa Keeps the Light On by Yolanda Kamara. The numbers came up in the segment. 70,000 copies sold in Canada alone. International rights in 7 countries. Animated series forthcoming from CBC. Stuart set down his fork. Kara noticed. She'd been watching him watch the television. Isn't that your... Yeah, he said. Kira looked at the screen, then back at him, and said nothing else. But something shifted in the room that morning, the way temperature shifts before a storm, and Stuart understood later that this was the moment he first felt the particular cold of understanding what he'd done. He'd known about the divorce. Yolanda had filed 7 months after he left, and he'd signed everything without contest. He'd told himself she'd be fine. He'd told himself she was resilient. He'd used that word like it absolved him of something. He hadn't imagined this. He tried to contact her that evening. He found her publicist's address through the Harbor House website and wrote a message he deleted 3 times before finally sending. Something measured, he told himself. Something sincere. He received an automated reply: Miss Kamara is not accepting personal correspondence at this time. Kara left 2 months later. She didn't make a dramatic announcement. She simply told Stuart one Thursday evening, with the particular calm of someone who had already decided well in advance, that she'd been offered a position in Calgary and she was going to take it, that she was sorry, but she needed to be honest. She hadn't seen a future for them for some time. Is this about the promotion? Stuart asked. He'd been passed over at the firm, the second time in 18 months. It's about a lot of things, Kara said. She was gone by the end of the month, taking the coffee table she'd bought herself and leaving the rest. Stuart kept the apartment. He kept his job technically, but the internal audit the firm initiated that spring found what they called administrative discrepancies in 3 of his client accounts. He was not formally let go. He was moved to a back-office role with no client contact, no advancement path, and the unmistakable quality of a career that has been quietly concluded. He thought about Yolanda every day. He thought about Celina, their daughter, who was nearly 2 now, who existed in photographs he'd seen only because Aunt Beverly kept a semi-public social media account and had not yet blocked him. He had looked at those photographs more times than he would admit to anyone. He began to understand, slowly and without anyone accelerating it for him, what he'd actually done. He had looked at the weight of a real life, a woman with an illness, an unborn child, a future that required showing up for, and he had decided that weight was the wrong kind. He had left because he'd called it a burden. And what he'd actually left was the only thing in his life that had ever asked him to be more than convenient. He wrote to the publicist again. He called a number that may have been Beverly's. No answer, then a blocked contact. He sent a letter to the Hamilton address he'd found from a forwarded piece of mail. It came back unreturned but unacknowledged. He told himself she'd come around eventually. He said it until he no longer believed the sound of it. The elementary school in Stony Creek was holding a literacy week in the first week of March. A grade 2 teacher named Ms. Okafor had submitted a request through Harbor House's school visits program 8 months prior, citing Adisa Keeps the Light On as the book that had most changed how her students talked about hard days. The invitation had landed on Yolanda's publicist's desk, and Yolanda had said yes immediately because she always said yes to schools. That was the part that mattered most to her. The school had also, separately and in no way connected to the author visit, arranged for a volunteer financial literacy workshop for grades 5 and 6, a community outreach program run through a local credit union. Volunteers registered through an online form. Stuart Whitfield had signed up 3 weeks prior. He did not know who else was coming that day. Yolanda arrived at 9:15 with her publicist, a canvas tote of books and a bag of stickers for the kids. She signed in at the front desk, was given a name tag, and was led down the hall to the gymnasium where 2 classes were already seated in rows on the floor, cross-legged and attentive. Celina was at daycare. Aunt Beverly had called that morning just to say she was proud of her. And Yolanda had held the phone for a moment, after hanging up, standing in the kitchen, just breathing. She read to the children for 40 minutes. She did the voices. She answered questions with the full seriousness they deserved. A boy named Elijah asked why Adisa's mom didn't believe her at first, and Yolanda said, "Because sometimes the people who love us most still have things they need to learn." And the room went quiet in the way rooms do when something true has been said plainly. When the session ended, the children filed out in a shuffle of snow boots and mittens. A few teachers asked for inscriptions. Yolanda obliged, sitting at a small table near the gymnasium doors, her publicist packing beside her. She was capping her pen when she looked up and saw Stuart. He was standing in the corridor outside the gym, wearing a volunteer lanyard she didn't recognize, and a jacket she did. The dark navy one of the last things she remembered him wearing the night he left. He was looking at her with the expression of someone who has spent a long time preparing for a moment, and has discovered, on arrival, that no amount of preparation covers the actual thing. He looked different, thinner. Something in the set of his shoulders that hadn't been there before. Yolanda held his gaze. She felt her publicist still beside her, quietly aware. "It's okay," she said to her publicist, the same words she had said to herself in that Ottawa hallway to her unborn daughter, to the jar of applesauce in a parking lot on the way home from No Frills. "Give me a minute." She came out into the corridor. The children were long gone. The hallway was quiet under the hum of fluorescent lights. Stuart took a step toward her, then seemed to think better of it. "I didn't know you'd be here," he said. "I need you to know I didn't arrange this. I believe you. I've been trying to reach you. I know." "Yolanda." His voice dropped lower. I know what I did. There isn't a version of this where I can justify it. I've thought about it every day. I've thought about her every day. He paused. I'd like to know her. If there's any way you'd consider. Stuart, she said his name quietly, and he stopped. She took a breath. When you left, she said, you told me I'd figure it out. You said it like it was a compliment. Like being self-sufficient was the same thing as not needing anything from you. She looked at him steadily. But what you actually did was leave a woman managing a serious illness, 6 months pregnant, because it was hard. Because you decided that the difficulty of my life made it less worth staying for. He opened his mouth. She continued. I'm not telling you this to cause you pain. I'm telling you because you've asked me to consider something. And before I can answer that, I need you to understand what you're actually asking me to consider. You didn't leave because of a lapse in judgment. You left because you held a belief that I and my unborn daughter were problems to be weighed against your comfort and that we came up short. She paused. A belief is not the same as a mistake. A mistake is something you do without knowing better. You knew. I know that now, he said. I know it more than you. I know you believe that. Her voice stayed calm. And I'm not certain it isn't true. She looked at him for a moment, but it doesn't change my answer. Stuart went still. I forgive you, Yolanda said. And it was not a performance, not a courtesy extended to end an uncomfortable conversation. It was a thing she had worked out slowly over 2 years on the other side of everything he'd dismantled. Carefully, on purpose, because she had discovered that carrying it made her slower and she had too much to build. I genuinely do. I put that weight down a long time ago, because I couldn't build what I needed to build while holding it. Then, forgiveness isn't the same as trust, she said. And it's not the same as access. She glanced once at the lanyard around his neck, at the hallway around them, at the stack of her books visible through the gymnasium doorway. I built this life without you, Stuart. Not despite you, without you. And those are different things. She glanced toward the gymnasium one last time. Celina is going to grow up watching her mother build something real. She's going to grow up knowing that the people around her show up when it's hard. Not only once the hard part is finished. That's the only thing I want her to inherit from me. And I built it alone. She looked at him for one more moment. I hope you find your way to something better, she said. I mean that sincerely. But that path doesn't run through me, and it doesn't run through her. She turned and walked back into the gymnasium. Her publicist had finished packing and was waiting by the door, with the canvas tote over her shoulder, and the expression of someone who had understood everything without being told any of it. Ready? Her publicist asked. Yes, Yolanda said. Let's go. She signed 3 more books at the front desk for staff members who'd been waiting, smiled genuinely at the school secretary, who told her that Adisa had changed the way her own daughter talked about difficult days, and walked out through the front doors into a March afternoon that was cold and bright and smelled like snow that hadn't fallen yet. She sat in the car for a moment before starting it. She thought about that first night in Aunt Beverly's spare room, staring at a ceiling that wasn't hers, her daughter not yet born, the math of her life adding up to something that looked, from the inside, like nothing. She thought about the notebook on the kitchen table. She thought about the jar of applesauce. She thought about the woman with the library bag who had handed over $7 without being asked, without making it into anything more than what it was. She thought about Celina at daycare right now. Probably terrorizing the building blocks, probably making the other children laugh. She started the car. She had told Celina something last week. Celina was too young to carry the meaning of it yet, but Yolanda believed in starting early, believed that words a child couldn't parse still left some kind of impression, the way water finds the shape of a container long before it knows the name of it. Even when everything falls apart, she'd said, sitting on the living room floor with Celina in her lap and a board book open between them, you can still build something real from the pieces. That's all strength has ever actually meant. Celina had said something indeterminate and tried to eat a corner of the page. Yolanda had laughed until her eyes filled up, and it was not a sad laugh at all. She drove out of the school parking lot, past the iron fence, past the crossing guard waving cheerfully at no one in particular, and she did not look in the rearview mirror. She had her daughter to pick up. She had a chapter to finish. She had a foundation proposal waiting in her email that she'd promised herself she would read tonight. A program to support mothers managing chronic illness through arts grants. The thing she'd been building quietly for 8 months. The thing that didn't have a name yet, but was almost ready. There was a great deal of work left. She could not wait to do it.